So good to see you all. Thanks for dropping in with us at such an early hour. We were talking like 8:30 might be a little bit more comfortable for a start time, right? But here we are. My name is Karen Deary, and I come to you from our Patent Central office, so right here in Harrisburg. I'm the Patent State Lead for School Improvement, so my primary function is to support our intermediate units who are working with our designated schools under ESSA for ATSI and TSI. I'm also part of our literacy initiative, and I love doing that work with the literacy team. And I also moonlight a little bit with our behavior team as a Check and Connect trainer and a Renew trainer. And then I'm also our central lead for our Spell Grant. If you're not familiar with that and you want to hear more about that, focusing on early literacy for our youngest learners, catch me after this session. But I'm also going to turn the mic over to my partner for this morning and let him introduce himself.
Good morning. I'm Mike Imburgia. I'm the State Project Director for K-12 Continuous Improvement. I work out of IU13, and my primary role is to support our schools designated as Comprehensive Support and Improvement, so our CSI schools across the state. And I really take a systems level look at the work that we do across the state in supporting those schools. And I work closely with Karen in kind of our school improvement efforts across the board. And this is really her presentation. I'm kind of here to help out as I can, so I'm going to turn it back over to Karen.
Thanks, Mike. So what I created for you, I will send the handouts and whatnot so they can be posted on the conference website, but I did create the QR code for you where you can access a Google folder that has the documents that we're going to be using for this morning. So there's a QR code or there's a tiny URL up here. There are some paper copies of the handouts scattered throughout the room as well. So if you're comfortable where you are, but you want a handout, just feel free to come up and grab one. They're interspersed on seats up front here. We will be I'm going to be sharing information with you this morning, but what I really want you to do is have some opportunity to talk amongst yourselves as well and kind of think about how you might use some of these resources that go along with the Accelerated Learning Toolkit. So again, you might want to use the paper copies. You can go in and grab the documents out of Google. If you get them out of Google, I'm just going to remind you, they're not forced copies. So please download or make your own copy and move your own copy, not the original documents that are in the Google folder. Okay, and if you're not sure how to do that, we can help you with that as well. So in that vein, what I'd like you to do is just go ahead and take a minute to introduce yourself to the people sitting around you that you're going to be talking with throughout the morning if you don't already know them. So share who you are, what your role is, where you're from, and one fun fact about yourself. So 3 minutes to do that in your little groups. Thanks for coming back with me. So, and are there any fun facts that we all need to know about somebody? Hopefully you learned something fun. Are you all enjoying Hershey? Okay, good. That's a fun fact, I think. So we're going to talk this morning about the Accelerated Learning Toolkit. There are actually 4 pieces to the toolkit, and the focus this morning on this morning's session is on the high-quality academics piece. If you're interested, there will be a session tomorrow as well, looking at the scaffolded supports and the systems conditions pieces of the Accelerated Learning Toolkit. But from the homepage, or from the first slide here, you can get a link directly to the toolkit if you're not familiar with it, something that you might want to check out. And what I'm doing is just going to show you really quickly as we scroll down. In the Accelerated Learning System, there are these 4 components: high-quality academics, supporting learning environments, healthy systems conditions, and the system of scaffolded supports, as I mentioned. So we're focusing on this one at the top left, the high-quality academics, for this morning. And we're going to start, and we're looking at this entire assessment system for ensuring that we're securing and delivering high-quality instruction for our students. We want to make sure that we're doing the best that we can using evidence-based practices to assess and evaluate and choose those curricula that are best going to teach all of our students. So we're talking about our general populations, and then we're also thinking about those student groups. So anybody who is familiar with our school improvement system, and again, those schools that I work very closely with that are designated for ATSI, which is additional targeted support and improvement, or TSI, which is targeted support and improvement, are designated for individual student groups. So we also have to be considerate and think about how are we providing optimal educational experiences and opportunities to specific student groups. So our students with disabilities, our students who are economically disadvantaged, our racial and ethnic groups, and those kinds of things. So we're going to explore this morning this kind of whole system of assessment. What are we doing with our assessments? What data do we have access to? How are we using it? And how are we making best instructional decisions using all of that data that we're collecting, okay, for our students? So I'm going to start you off with some guiding questions for this assessment piece. And looking at these, think about your district's assessment plan. Does your district have an assessment plan? Raise your hand if you're here from a school district. Okay. Are you from an IU? Is there anybody here from an IU? And I know I saw some patent hands in here, or some patent people in here as well. Okay, so thinking about your school and your LEA, does your school district have an assessment plan? Maybe? Do you know what it looks like? Do you know where to find it? Right? Okay. Do you know what's in it? So that's kind of what we're thinking about. Second sort of priming question for you is, how do you know that your assessments are high quality? How do you know that the assessments that are in that plan are high quality assessments? Are they rigorous? Are they giving you what you're looking for in terms of outcomes or the information that you need to guide the decisions that you're making? And then the third question that we're going to start with for this morning is, how do you know that those assessments are equitable? How are they inclusive? How are they including all of your students? How are they reaching everybody? Again, so you can make those decisions for all of your student groups. Okay, so that's kind of where we're coming from this morning. So thinking about your assessment plan, you want to see a plan that is really looking at the value and the vision of your school district. Does your assessment plan support what that vision says? Does it support what the outcomes are that you're looking for all of your students? In that assessment plan, when you're looking at that data that you're getting back, are you getting the data that you need and the information that you need to best assess, like, what are we doing really well? Who's performing really high in our district? Who's meeting those benchmarks? And which of our students are, reaching academic proficiency? So looking at those strengths for what we're doing, and then is it also able to kind of inform us as to where maybe some gaps are? So what are some of the concerns that we're seeing? Okay. And we're going to get into looking at that data and the analysis of that. What kinds of assessment are you using as well? So do you have a variety of assessments included in that plan? And again, are they those evidence-based sort of assessments that are going to help you make those decisions? And then looking at, as I already mentioned, the impact of that instruction. So when we get into the instructional piece, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But hopefully you're kind of picturing and thinking about, well, do I know this assessment plan? Do I know how it informs, how are we using that data to make those decisions moving forward? So we're talking about again, the rigor and the quality of those assessments. So we want to make sure that our assessments are aligned to our Pennsylvania standards. I was just in a conversation with some administrators not too long ago, earlier this week, and talking about the need for reviewing even the Pennsylvania standards for teachers, for that group of teachers, and ensuring. So do I have administrators in here? How many are you administrators? Okay. And thinking about, are you confident in that your teachers understand the Pennsylvania standards? Are we sure that teachers know, go on to the SAS portal, you're familiar with the SAS portal, and you can download those standards, okay? But making sure that our teachers understand what those standards are and how they connect to the instruction that we're delivering for students, being able to, pull those together. And then looking at both informal and formal evaluations or assessments. So we have our state assessments. We have our PSSAs or our PASA for our students with more significant cognitive needs. And then we have our Keystone exams, of course. So those are some of our formal, like summative exams that we have for kids. Are you using Acadience for reading or Dibbles? And how about for math? And you might be using Ames Web, so you're hearing those kinds of things. CDTs? Anybody using CDTs? Okay, yep, good. What else are you using? So just kind of start to think about that. We're going to have some conversations as we get through this and just talk about those assessments that you're using most often and most commonly, and are you finding them to be or to give you that information that you need? So do they contain that rigor? And are we implementing them with fidelity? That's a huge piece, is just making sure that there's some system for ensuring that our assessments are being delivered with fidelity, because if we're not, then we're not getting back the accurate information that we need to make those decisions. And we're going to be looking at our end of year data, right? The Future Ready data is just ready to come out. Hasn't been posted yet, has it? It's just ready to, it's any day now coming out. And really understanding then, here's why, these numbers look the way they do. And the ESSA report card. Are you familiar with the ESSA report card? Have you been on to see that? If not, we can take a look at that as well. Okay. Okay. Just making sure. The second to the last bullet on here really talks about how we communicate and help our families and our community understand all these numbers. If I'm moving into a new community, and I did this when I moved, my son was he was going to be starting second grade, so we were getting ready when he was in first grade to think about moving to a new area, and we were moving, out of the county, still within the state. But I got on, I looked at, things like the systems that were available at the time, similar to Future Ready or the report card and things like that, to look at districts to see, okay, where in this new county that I'm going to be moving to, do I want to send my son to school? If I'm not in education, I'm going to need somebody to help me understand what I'm looking at. So I knew where to go, but if I didn't know how to read those reports, they're not going to tell me a whole lot if I don't understand what those numbers are. So how are we communicating what all of this data means to our families and our community at large? Again, all in the hopes of making those best instructional decisions for our students so that we can move them forward. And then we also need to make sure that our assessments, just as our instruction is, accessible to all of our groups, to all of our students. And we can do that through things like universal design for learning. And again, I won't take you there, but I did include some links. So you can grab these links to get some of these additional resources. I wanted to make sure that this presentation was also resource heavy for you, so you can always go back and find this information, because I think these are things, some of these things are terms that we hear being thrown around, but maybe don't know really what they are or how they're being used. So are we engaging our students? How are we engaging them in these assessments? Are we giving them multiple ways to represent their learning? In our standardized assessments, they're pretty strict. But in other ways, in our more informal assessments or our classroom-based assessments, we need to make sure that we're actually assessing what kids have learned. I really want to know what they know and can do. And then, again, how to go back if I need to reteach or go to a different level of instruction for kids. That's going to help me do that. And there are standard accommodations available for students. So for those students who might have an IEP, who need assessment accommodations, we need to make sure that we know what accommodations are available for which types of assessments. Again, so that we're delivering those with fidelity, but we're making sure that our assessments are accessible to all of our students. And then looking at inclusive practices. And I will take you here, if you haven't seen this, this is fairly new. So our Inclusive Practices team has an Inclusive Practices Hub that if you haven't seen this yet, go in and take a look, and you'll find, if you're not familiar with Patton's teacher's desk references, these are really easy to read, quick. They're nice color copies, cardstock that you can go in and take a look. You can order those off of our patent website. But there are some, right down here, some high leverage practices for instruction. So there are some recorded webinars that you could go in and take a look at if you're looking at how can we boost our opportunities and our inclusivity for our students with disabilities. So I did want to take you there just so you have an idea of what's in that Inclusive Practices Hub. Okay. So the first thing, I chose one resource sort of for each section that I'm going to work through today for you to take a bigger, like more in-depth look at. So the first one that we're looking at this morning is that assessment plan. What does just for your building, think about what assessments are you using? So if you have, again, there were hard copies sprinkled out. The first document in that packet, or you can access it from the Google Drive, is just filling out this assessment inventory. So this is your first opportunity. Take about 30 seconds to a minute just to do a quick write, either on paper or digitally. Just do a quick write or a quick thought about what are the assessments that you're using in your building. Can you list them? And then think about like who takes those assessments? When are they given? What is the data being used for when you collect that data? And then who has access to the data? Who looks at the data from those individual assessments? So again, 30 seconds to a minute, quick write, and then go ahead and talk with that group that you met with first thing this morning and have a conversation about the different assessments that you're using. What does your assessment inventory look like? Okay. Is there anything that you came up with, or are there questions that came out of your conversations that you would like to ask? I did have one question saying, like, is there a repository? Is there a place to go where you can find all of this information for a school or for a district? You would have to check into your district. So I know that there is Central Dauphin. I did not include the link, but it's included in the toolkit document that I showed you first. Central Dauphin School District does have their assessment plan posted. So you can search that online and find that and see what it looks like. And their plan does talk about, here's the assessments we use, here's the data we collect, here's what it means, here's how we're going to communicate this information with our families. So Central Dauphin, I know, at a very minimum, does have something posted that you can find. Are there any other questions or any other comments from your conversations? Okay. So this is just a start. This is just, again, one tool, but it's quick and easy, an easy way for your data team to sit down and really look at, here's everything that we have available. And I adapt this from, this is one of my favorite resources when I'm talking about data. If you haven't seen it, this is Victoria Bernhardt, Data Analysis for Continuous School Improvement. Will give you, again, how to analyze, how to collect all kinds of academic data, behavior data, perception data, all of those kinds of things, and how to use it and interpret it. There's also a smaller abridged version of this, but it looks big and thick and heavy. A lot of it is in the back. Appendices are examples of schools. So the actual content of it is not as hefty as it looks. So if you're not familiar with it, this is a great resource. Data Analysis for Continuous School Improvement, Victoria Bernhardt. So I included some other resources for you just when we're talking about this assessing piece in this assessment plan. If you're not familiar, part of our state team includes a performance management team, so a system for performance management. And they've created some data learning modules for us. If you're not familiar with this resource, this is our school improvement website. So our system for continuous school improvement for any school that's looking at, again, how can we improve our instruction and our practices for all of our students? So it's basically iu13.org/school-improvement, and you can find the website there. And I simply went to this data tools and resources page. At the bottom, the last tab on this page is data learning modules. Each page has a set of learning modules that you can access, but if you're looking specifically for some of this data practices that we're talking about, you can find modules on like what is a data-rich school culture? How do we make time to look at our data, analyze it? What are multiple measures of data that we could be using? And when you enter any of these modules, you're going to get over here. You can start the course over here. These are all self-paced. It's nothing that you have to register for or sign for. They're open source to anybody who wants to access those. So I can either just start the course from here, or if I scroll down through sort of the objectives and the overview of the course, I can come down, and at the bottom, it'll give me a link to each piece of the course. So in this particular course, I'm starting with essential understandings. And then once I finish that piece of it, it'll go to understanding data resources and whatnot. So I enter in there. Sometimes there's just text to read. Sometimes there are some short 2, 3, 4-minute videos that you can view that go along with it. It just depends. Each course is different. And once I finish reading this information, then I can go down to the second lesson and open that. Okay, and I can read through that information as well. So again, access these learning modules from our IU13 continuous school improvement website. And again, over here in the data tools and resources, you can see there are a dozen or more modules just on that data. Did you want to add? Yeah, go ahead.
You need. They're all like 7 to 10 minutes. I know they're called courses, but they're really modularized so that you don't need to take an hour and a half to go through a course. It's really, hey, I want to learn a little bit more about this. Here's, it'll take 5, 10 minutes to do that. So that's where those are designed. You have the data ones. I also want to plug, you are looking at continuous improvement. You also have the entire continuous improvement processes on learning modules as well. Again, chunked out in 5, 10-minute sections. So if you want to learn more about root cause analysis or needs assessment, all of that's in there as well. So thank you, Karen, for plugging that in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's fine. So just, again, to kind of reiterate what Mike is saying and show you what he's talking about, I'm just on, if I go to IU13 School Improvement, this is the landing page. And I have a link here for human capital resources. So if you're looking for any kind of support and information about staffing, again, retention, bringing in new staff, anything like that, our partner Megan Steiner, who is part of our state team as well, has a ton of resources for human capital. And then here is the link for the Pennsylvania Continuous Improvement resources that Mike was talking about. So you can access any of these links on the right through the menu, and you'll find learning modules in there. Okay. So again, I can just the first one, and I can go down to the bottom, and there are some learning modules just in how we put together a stakeholder team and whatnot in this case. Get back here. Okay, so there are links in here as well to looking at the SAS Assessment Center, looking at CDTs. If you're not familiar with those diagnostic tools, you can go in and take a look and get information. We also have a Pennsylvania Evidence Resource Center, so you can go in there and find, this is part of the school improvement resources that were created for schools as well. It's just evidenceforpa.org, and we've arranged, or the team arranged these topics as you scroll down by future ready PA indicators. So you'll find, English language arts, you'll find graduation, attendance, etc. Or you can find them organized by strategies for academics, or strategies for learning environment, or strategies for educators and staff. And there are all kinds of additional resources on here as well. I would say, don't neglect this Learn tab up here on the right. And there are resources and documents there to help you with that assessment piece. Okay. Again, there are some IES practice guides and resources included in this list as well. Okay, so let's go ahead on to this next section and looking at then analyzing and interpreting all that data. So you've given all of these assessments. What are you doing with that data that you're getting back? So the guiding questions that I kind of want you to think about as we work through this section is, how are you going to engage people from your school in the analysis and interpretation of all of that data? So who's a part of that data team? And think about the people that you include on that data team. And then what protocols are you using? Do you have data review protocols in place that you're following? So there are evidence-based protocols that we can pull from to make sure that we're not spinning our wheels when we're looking at that data, so that we're looking at it efficiently and intentionally, so that we're, again, we don't have time to waste in our own days, and we don't have time to waste for our students as well. We want to keep them moving. And then, are you able to, and is there time built into your day for you to collaborate and meet with other people, either from your subject area or from your grade level? Are your special educators included in those teams, in that collaboration? Are your English learners, is there consideration for those? And are those people invited to these meetings, those educators invited to these collaboration meetings? And is everybody, again, efficiently looking at all this data that we're collecting? When we're talking about data inquiry, there are some central beliefs, and I pulled this from the EL website that you can go in and take a look at. But just, do we have the foundational pieces in place? Meaning, do I feel comfortable if I'm part of this data team? I need to feel comfortable that I have a voice and that I can trust sort of the collaboration that's going to happen. I can ask the vulnerable questions, right? Without it, so it should be, again, that collaborative conversation, not that, who's doing what and it's not working, and targeting a person, like, those kinds of things, just identifying those problems. And then building an action plan out of those conversations, making sure that we're building that concrete and sustainable action plan that's ensuring that we know where we are. So our conversations are going to tell, like, here's what we know about the progress of our kids and the achievement of our students. Where do we need to be, and how are we going to get there? So I need to build a plan that's going to be very explicit in helping guide us as a school, as a community, to make sure we're getting those outcomes for kids. Making sure that we're using those high-quality assessments and those high-quality data sources. So again, understanding and it's best to have somebody who can facilitate sort of these meetings, who really understands how to use that data and how to tear it apart. I know as a former special educator, that's, how I grew up in education. As a teacher, I was a special education teacher. I had a ton of data that my school and my department was asking me to collect on the students that I taught. And it was very interesting because I taught at the middle school level, and I just think that middle school is always different than the systems you have, right? See, you're with me. Then the systems that you have available to you in elementary school and high school are very different. So in middle school, I just know that I was collecting all of this data, and I didn't know what to do with it, and I didn't have somebody there to say, here's what you really need to look at, and here's what isn't going to provide you the information that you're looking for, right? So having that data team and that action plan for what we need to do, and those high quality sources. And then we talked about those, those inclusive structures that we need to have for our students. And then again, as I mentioned, having all of the appropriate players at the data analysis table as part of that team to make sure. I did provide a link in here for you for some data protocols that you can go in and take a look at. So if you don't feel like you have that structured data team and that system where you can have a data team meeting in the 30 minutes minus the bathroom break and the go get a snack and take my kid to music class and those kinds of things, it leaves you with about 23 minutes of your actual meeting time. You want to make sure that you have an efficient process to work through that. So I did try to include some just simple protocols for you, and it even gives you the timing in this case for this example. Okay. And then, how is that information going to be shared, even within your data team? So you want to consider, Are we going to show it in a chart? Are we going to show it in a graph form? A lot of our systems, if you're using Acadience or you're using a spreadsheet or you're using something like that, you can automatically create some of those charts and graphs. But we have to know how to look at those. We have to know what they're telling us, what information is included in there and what it means. So when we get all of those color codes, these kids are blue and these kids are green and these kids are yellow, I need to be able to sift through that and really know, what does that mean? And how deep do I need to go in to see where are the gaps for those, students who fall in the yellow and whatnot. At this point, though, I want to turn it over again to Mike to share a little bit about some of the systems that we're using to collect some data. And I think that one didn't come on, so I don't.
Thank you. Yes, I think there's a couple of really key points as we're talking about the data teams and the work we do there. And the first is, so in CSI, we collect a lot of data. We really try to do our best to turn those back around to make them actionable to schools. But one thing, on a quarterly basis, we look at like benchmark scores. So when schools wrote their plans, they said, hopefully by October, we're going to be here. In our first couple of years doing the CSI process, we got to that first quarterly benchmark, and we got a lot of, we need to revise this benchmark because we don't know how to look at these data. We thought we could measure this, but we don't know how to. Or we thought our report was going to tell us this, but it doesn't. So I think one of the key things as you're doing that assessment mapping is kind of in the who has access to it, but who's going to interpret it so that hopefully when you get to that benchmark time, you know what you're looking at and you've kind of set out ahead of time what some of those actions might be. We've implemented a strategy. We're hoping that strategy gets us to this point. If it does, great, we keep going. If it doesn't, what are we going to do? So how do we make these meetings actionable rather than okay, we've described a problem. We all walk away knowing what the problem is, but we don't have our next steps set out. So I think that's a really key piece to that. And then also that implementation piece. So we also talk about magical thinking. So if we provide professional development on illustrative math, then math scores will increase. There's a lot of stuff in between that if and then statement. So if we purchase it, if we teach our teachers how to use it, if we monitor the use of it, if we assess students along the way, then math scores may increase. So as you're looking at that implementation piece, how do you also measure those little pieces? Like, are we doing just some informal walkthroughs to make sure the key components of what we're trying to implement are in place? So we've really tried to set up a system of looking at implementation along with outcomes to really try to drive instruction forward. So, and a lot of that comes from, that assessment map is the first thing, like, do we even know what we're looking at when we're looking at it? But also to take some time in thinking about that implementation of your strategy and what are those key components that you need to analyze along the way to make sure that when you get to that quarterly or halfway through the year or at the end of the year when you're saying, how did we do? Did we actually do what we said we were going to do in order to have the results that we wanted? And I think that's a key piece that we've, over the 3 years we've really been implementing, have been able to strengthen those little, how do we know this professional learning was high quality? Not just did we ask teachers if they liked it, but did we also go into classrooms to make sure that we're seeing those components being implemented? Did we ask people what's not working about this? How is our school culture not fitting into this? And then just one other comment on the previous slide, that culture piece is really important because I don't know how many meetings you've walked into where somebody puts a spreadsheet up, you spend 2 hours trying to decipher the spreadsheet and come up with those 2 or 3 things you're trying to figure out. To really make those meetings more useful, if that analysis is done, if you have somebody who's done the analysis and can come in and say, I looked at our Acadian scores, this is what I found, now what are we going to do to help, spread the great things that are happening from this class to this class, or how do we improve this? If you have that trusting culture where the meeting isn't, yeah, but this student, probably scored this on that test, and I don't really believe that, how do we get around that to say, look, we're looking at this this way, here's what we set out in our previous meeting, really try to identify those structures and build that trust because, a 2-hour meeting of 10 people in a room looking at a spreadsheet, I think we've all been in those meetings and you can walk out of those feeling really frustrated. If you can walk into the meeting saying, here's what we know, here's what we're going to do about it, it makes it just much more productive along the way. And then share that responsibility around when you have multiple people who, can look at an assessment, and hopefully that's also in that assessment map. Okay, is there anything else you want me to cover there? All right.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks for hitting on that culture piece also, that just the understanding, being able to understand, being able to know, what the expectations are for those meetings, being comfortable in there, not spinning your wheels, not spending all your time trying to sift through the data without understanding. Yeah. And I also want you to think about who makes sense to be on that team. So I mentioned this already, but looking at your data team, what is the vision for that team? You want to make sure that you have that clear vision and that everybody understands, and you have those group norms about how we're going to run our team and what our core beliefs are for our data analysis. Looking at, again, those tools and protocols that you can use. That, did you ever hear of that, the DRIP? We're data rich, but information poor. That's how I felt when I was that special education teacher. I had all kinds of data, but I really didn't have the information I needed from that, or I didn't know how to use it and most efficiently so that I can make the best decisions for kids as I was moving forward. And then ensuring that the people who need to have access really do have access to that data. So I can just, personal example, again, I'm working through that with my SPELL team. That's that Success for PA Early Learners. But we're in the process of collecting and looking at that beginning of the year benchmark data from their Acadience assessments that they gave to their kindergarten students. So I'm not part of that school community. I'm coming in as a support from Patton, working with the IU through this grant work, and I don't have access to their data. So we have to figure out, what is the system that is going to give my IU counterpart and myself access to their Acadience data. And then we have, helping the school really look at it and figure out how are we going to best group, our kindergarten students to get the maximum benefit. And we talked about the communication of that as well. And really thinking about, in those assessments that you're giving, what is the purpose for the assessment, okay? And that's going to help us determine how we're going to look at that data as well. So are we assessing for learning? Are we looking in to find out, what are kids really understanding from the instruction that we've been delivering for, the past period of time? And how am I going to provide students that feedback that they need so that they can influence their own learning? They have to understand as well all of these scores that they're getting and understand, okay, I really nailed this, but I didn't quite understand this concept. How am I going to reinforce that for myself so that I understand the next chapter that we're getting to, or the next concept that we're getting to in, my algebra class or something like that. So also helping students understand that. Or is assessment used as part of the learning? So assessment as learning. So that I tutor a student who's in 9th grade now. And part of what we do a lot of, it started out as reading support for him, gotten him through the foundational skills for reading, and he can pull apart and apply those concepts that he's learned. And now we're really looking at, because he's hit that high school, he's hit that 9th grade, and that was a huge shock to him, as it is to many of our kids. So now we spend a lot of time looking at study skills and really figuring out how he learns best, because up to this point, he's just been kind of able to sit there and attend and be present. And somehow he learned what the teacher was trying to tell him. Biology hit, it's not so true anymore, right? So helping him understand, here's how you learn best, using the information and the structures that your teacher has in place. Or is it assessment of learning? So again, figuring out, is a student moving along the progression that they should be? Am I getting the expected outcomes and achievement levels for that student? Okay, so taking a look at those things. So the second document you have, if you have the paper handouts, if not, the link is here from Education Elements, is looking at your current data culture. This is an entire document that you can take a look at, and it has instructions, and it has all of the introductory information in there. But what I printed for you, if you have the handout copy, what I printed is just the last few pages. I think there are 3 pages that take you through some guiding questions and some questions that you might want to think about. So while this loads, I'm going to give you a chance to access this either digitally, or if you have the paper handout, you can. If you don't, share with your neighbor if you have the paper copy. And there aren't enough, but scroll all the way down to the end, and I'm looking at digitally starting at page 28. So this is looking at thinking about along your district. This first section in blue is just thinking about the alignment of your assessments. So how would you rate that in your context? Do you have a shared purpose for using data? So I'm looking just at this first item as an example, that was developed by engaging a cross-section of stakeholders versus there's one person sitting in the ivory tower of the curriculum instruction department who says you're going to use this, right? So how did those conversations happen, and how were those decisions made? So how would you rate that? So this is a nice, again, the first section is looking at the alignment. The next section is looking at the, is it user-centered? Is it, understandable by a lot of people, students, families, your community? The third section is holistic. The fourth section, does it promote equity and inclusion that we've talked about? Is it sustainable? We know a lot of practices that aren't sustainable for various reasons. And is it responsive? So this is a nice little, again, there's a lot of introductory information at the beginning of this, but I just wanted to give you a sample of some guiding questions or some guiding components that you could think about in your own data culture. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes, just looking at time. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to take a look at this. Jot down some comments or your own thinking about your own system. Talk with your neighbor, find out what's going on next door, and see if there's anything, there might be some practices that you could consider. Okay, so about 3 minutes. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to talk about some of our systems.
Thank you. So we actually did a very similar inventory with we offered it to all of our CSI schools. We're going to make it available to other schools moving forward. But we partnered with Hanover Research, which is a national research organization, to really look at this data culture piece. And we asked these questions, but we actually broke it out by type of assessment and things like that. I just wanted to share some really interesting findings that we had. So we had about 1,300 staff respond to our survey. One of the questions was, how easy is it to interpret the results of your assessments? Academic, we had pretty high ratings of 75 to 80% of people saying it was easy to, fairly easy. When we got to behavior, it was only about half of the staff said, yes, this is easy to interpret. So, that kind of raised some alarms, like what's going on with these behavioral assessments? The other piece was, how useful are your assessments? The academic, again, was pretty high. Behavior was the highest rated as the most important, or, so it goes most important. Of 90% of staff responded, yes, this is very important. However, only half the staff were saying, I can interpret and use these results. So, by doing these inventories, sometimes you find out and some of it's probably timing, right? Behavioral assessments are a lot more individual to students, so do we have the time to analyze it and things like that? But it really raised some flags for us, and as we build out the resources, it's probably going to be another module that we're going to put in, how can you effectively use behavioral data and things like that. So I think it does make a lot of sense, and it's probably a 15-minute, 20-minute survey for the staff to do, but it really tells us a lot. And what we're doing is providing back. We have our statewide results, and then each school is also getting their individual results compared to the statewide. So you can see that, across all CSI schools, 80% of staff are saying this. In your school, it's 95%. You're crushing it. Or, hey, here's a deficit for us that only 20% of our staff know how to analyze these types of results, but we're putting a lot of weight behind those results. So I think these inventories really do have a lot of value to do. They don't take a long time. Something like this you could throw into a Google survey and probably get done in 10, 15 minutes. So just keep that in mind as you're going. And I just wanted to also express how we're trying to utilize some of those data to help build out some additional resources for everybody. So if you go back to that IU13 webpage at some point in time, you'll probably see some stuff on, especially around the behavioral assessments, because that was one of the areas that was really flagged as a challenge.
Thank you. Were there any other questions that came out of the conversations that you just had about this inventory?
Well, since Mike just mentioned it, can I give you the mic then? Sure.
Yeah, Mike, since you just mentioned it, what behavioral assessments were you using?
Yeah, so this was a really general question. Thanks. Another challenge with working across 122 schools in about 40 districts is we have to be somewhat agnostic when we ask these questions. So A lot of our schools do use, it's called PBIS rewards as one of their tracking measures. I don't know if teachers were calling that an assessment. I know a lot have built individual inventories and things like that for students. So that's our next step, is to dive a little bit deeper into the data to find out what exactly folks are using, so then we can, I know previously we were asking those questions and it was much more on the academic side, so now we're shifting to the behavioral side. We have a lot of people using STAR, Acadience, MAP on the academic side, so I don't have a good answer to that, but it was across so there was not one, there was no school that was like at 90% of like, yes, we know how to use our behavioral assessments well, and I know that people use a lot of them, so I think just in general, it's telling as well.
Thank you. Anybody else? Great. Okay. Let's look at some additional resources just really quickly. For this section is, obviously you can go to eMetrics, you can go to the classroom diagnostic data that is available from PDE and whatnot. The central beliefs about the data inquiry teams, I linked that document that was on an earlier slide in this section. There is a video if you want to see what a data team can look like. There's a video here of a third grade data team. It's about, if I remember correctly, it's about 4.5 minutes long, so it's not real long, but it'll give you a nice kind of overview of how, again, that efficient data team meeting can run. There's another practice guide. Here are some digging deeper resources from the PDE website. If you're not familiar, these are really nice place to go to find out, like, how can we interpret that data? How can we use that data? These are very specific. So you can see the first link here is for students with a history of higher achievement. Then there's a students who have a history of lower achievement. Then we can look at some content areas specifically, English language arts, there's math, and there's science. So take a look at these digging deeper resources if you haven't seen those before as well. You can also hit up our patent MTSS website. So if you're not familiar with that, this link will take you right to our patent page for MTSS. I know sometimes things on the patent website are a little bit tricky to find, so that'll take you right there. And you can also check out PA Data Power Shots. So there's some quick videos and informational links on there if you haven't seen those before. So we talk about all of this assessment and all of this analysis so that we can get to the instruction, so that we can, again, provide the best instruction for all of our students. So some of your guiding questions for this section on instruction is, how are you determining, like, the time that you're given for instruction? Is it enough time? Are we spending too much time? What are we doing with that instructional time? So what I see is, again, if we're looking at, a reading block, let's say there's 90 minutes devoted to reading in an elementary setting. How many of those 90 minutes are the kids actually involved and engaged in that instruction? Versus, here's one of my new favorite terms, like versus being engaged in the Crayola curriculum. Right? So part of a book study by Mike Schmoker right now, we meet on Friday mornings, and we're reading his book, Results Now 2.0. And he talks about this Crayola curriculum, which is, a nod to, all of the coloring and those kinds of things that kids are doing during reading instruction time. Looking at the engagement of that and the intent and the meaning of that. Is it meaningful instruction for kids? And are they really getting anything? So that's what I could go on all day about that. That's what they're talking about. How are you using a variety of instructional methods? So how are you delivering that instruction to your kids? Are you using those strategies that are evidence-based strategies and that are targeting the instruction that you want to give, or targeting the content that you want kids to learn? And is it a way that's, again, accessible to your students? And then are you aligning all of that, your assessment, your curriculum, your instruction to the standards, all of those kinds of things is the alignment there. Okay. So one of the things that you can do is look at conducting a curriculum audit. So just to see, are we teaching our kids what we think we're teaching them, and what we made, those decisions about, are what we want our students to learn, what we want them to know and be able to do as a result of their instruction. So I included for you, again, a link to an example of a curriculum audit tool. This comes from Missouri. You have, if you have the handout packet, you have a hard copy of this. And then looking at just, a focus area. In this case, we're looking at vertical and horizontal alignment of the standards. So anywhere where you see a reference to Missouri, just cross that out and insert Pennsylvania. And again, these are sort of a guidelines for you to think about. Is your, and there are some questions here. So do you have a scope and a sequence that delineates what standards should be taught at each grade level? Do you understand, if you're do you understand what that scope and sequence is? Were teachers a part of those decisions? Again, or was it that one person who sits in the curriculum instruction office who put that together? Are you aware of what standards are taught in the grade level or the course prior to yours so that you know what kids should be coming in with? Do you know what they should be leaving with so that they're ready for the next course or the next grade? Are you aware of what standards are taught in the grade level or course, again, after the one that you're in? And then here are, for each one, there's then a continuum of implementation or not of each of those, okay? So you can go down and you can take a look through that as well. I'm going to go ahead and move on and just keep going so that we can get through instruction, and then we have one more section as well, and I'm just being aware of the time that we have. We want to make sure that we're using that data to look at learning gaps for all of our kids. So where are we seeing that we didn't quite hit the mark? So you're getting those results from your PSSAs and your CDTs and all of those, assessments that we're giving so that we can really tear those apart and think about, okay, somewhere we didn't quite hit this standard or this set of standards as hard as we needed to, and our kids aren't getting all of the instruction and the information that they need from that. So identifying those learning gaps, doing a curriculum review will help us with that. Looking at your master schedule. So what does your schedule look like in your building? What does your schedules look like in each of your classrooms? As part of some of you might be aware, the new system of supports through Patton and the intermediate units, we're doing some classroom scans and whatnot. And I'm seeing places where just doing an environmental scan of the classroom, I'm seeing classroom schedules and there are chunks of time missing. So I'll see a schedule that says reading happens from, 8:30 until 9:30. And then the next thing on the schedule is at 9:40. Like, well, what happened from 9:30 to 9:40? There's nothing on the schedule. That's 10 minutes of unaccounted for time. So really looking at your building schedules and your classroom schedules to make sure that we are optimizing the time that we're allotting to instruction that we know that we're doing. Again, we're talking about the alignment of all of that. And you also want to build in that common planning time. And that's going to, depending on where you are and what level you're at, that could be grade level planning time. So all of our second grade teachers have a chance to get together so that we all know. And again, when I'm looking at my spell team, the kindergarten teachers right now, I'm looking at, are you all, about the same place in terms of the reading instruction? Are we using, Unit 3, Week 3, Lesson 2? Are we all there kind of at the same time? So having that plan and knowing, that everybody's kind of in the same place at the same time. But during that common planning time, also making sure that we're including the teachers of our English learners, the teachers of our students with IEPs, all of those other important voices need to be a part of those common planning times as well. As you get into the higher grades, you might be looking at content area common planning time. But again, if I'm my sister, who's a high school math teacher, sitting with other math teachers, whether they teach geometry like she does or not, but understanding, what's going on in those other courses so that we can align both horizontally and vertically our content and our expectations and our outcomes for kids. And then this is always, a concern, but looking at your resource allocations. So how are we deploying staff? Are we using all of our staff in the most optimal way throughout the building? what materials do we have access to, and making sure that we're using the materials that we have in the way that they're intended, and also going back to that fidelity piece, and how can we make sure that everybody has what they need, and then, you know, any kind of technology, resources and materials as well. Okay. Also, we want to make sure that we're kind of investigating our instructional systems to make sure that we're using those high leverage strategies that are going to elicit the best outcomes and the results for our kids. So looking at the current systems of support that are in place, do you, thinking about if you have a multi-tiered system of support, what is happening during your tier 2 small group time? What's happening during your tier 3 intervention time? Things like that. Looking and just ensuring that your tier 1 is solid and in place. It starts there. A multi-tiered system isn't going to benefit the way we want it to if our tier 1 isn't a good, solid, strong system. So making sure that we're looking at our tier 1 materials and resources and our instruction at that core, because we have to fix that first before we can think about how are we going to layer on those additional tiers. Getting back into just the reminder of the variety of assessments that we're providing to students so that we can get the best picture of, again, what they know and can do. Also looking at how we're grouping students. So that's going back to understanding how to really tear apart that data and understand what the data is telling us so that we can group our students appropriately. We want to, those small groups. So I have in my tier 1, I'm going to have a time, 15, 20 minutes, up to a half an hour maybe, of small group instructional time. So how are those groups going to be decided? And looking, beyond just my classroom, if I'm talking about how I'm going to deploy staff, if I have 7 kindergarten teachers, can I mix up those students and those teachers so that, again, in my small groups, we're targeting the right skills in the most effective and efficient way for those kids? Rather than me being in room 30 and I take just my room 30 kids and only divide my room 30 kids into small groups and try to hit all the different needs that they have. So really thinking about those grouping structures for your students and for how you're using your staff as well. Okay. And then I think we have touched on the alignment and the importance of that. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet, though, is those professional learning communities. They're happening all over the place. And we want to make sure that we're understanding what the purpose and the vision of our professional learning communities are. So again, when we're talking about that collaboration and pulling those groups of people together, who is part of the professional learning community and what are our goals for that group? How are we talking? What are we talking about in those PLCs? Do we have protocols and systems in place that support the work that we're doing so that we're getting the outcomes that we want? And then I have, again, just a list here of resources that link right back to this instructional piece. So looking on the SAS portal at the curriculum frameworks. If you haven't ever done that, take a look at that direct link. And you can go in and you can look by subject and grade level and other kinds of filters in there. Looking at the curriculum gap that we do have. Are you, identifying the gaps in your own system. So again, Mike talked about some resources. You can go onto the IU13 website for continuous school improvement in Pennsylvania, and there are a ton of resources on there that can help you assess your system and work through a self-evaluation even to determine where are the gaps. And then again, resources for identifying priorities and goals that you have and how to, writing an action plan to put those into place. Some additional, I'm looking at instructional coaching. So we need to make sure that we're using our instructional coaches in the best way possible. That's another valuable resource. If you have instructional coaches in your building, if you're a teacher in a building that has instructional coaches, do you know how to use those people most effectively in your setting? So knowing what their role is, knowing what the scope of their support can look like, and making sure that we're tapping into those professionals. Okay. Again, some lesson planning resources, some differentiated instruction. That'll take you to Carol Ann Tomlinson. and some other resources for instruction. Okay. And then our final section, when we're looking at ensuring that we have high quality academics and practices in place, is we have to go back and reflect on those things that we're doing. And we have to think about what's working, what isn't working, what can I do differently? So again, in my own room 30, what can I do differently in terms of my design and delivery of instruction, looking at us as a building, maybe starting at a grade level system, then looking at a building system, looking at a district-wide system, what is working and what isn't. In some of our larger districts, that can look very different. So again, if you have those people sitting at the district office making all of the overarching decisions, they're doing what's best for the community at large. And then we also have to look at what is working, you know, in those larger systems. If I have 50 elementary schools, they're going to be in neighborhoods where the cultures are very different. So I also have to look at what's going to support those individual settings as well. So, what systems are in place for your teachers to get together and reflect and collaborate on what's happening? Do you have a process that uses the assessment system that you have effectively so that you're monitoring student learning needs? And then bringing back into focus that community piece. How are we sharing and involving our community members as part of our self-assessment teams and our steering committees through the school improvement work that we're doing? It is a requirement from the federal ESSA laws to have certain members on those teams. So we have to have community representatives, which are so important. How are we involving our agencies and our medical field and our business partners in the decisions that we're making locally for our students? That's an important perspective to have as part of those teams. And I'll just give you a really quick story that I heard many years ago about a district in Pennsylvania. When they did that, what they noticed, they were looking at their attendance rates, and they wanted to increase the attendance rates for their particular school. And when they involved people from the medical community in their local area, what they found was kids were missing school because of medical appointments or dentist appointments, which makes sense. But what happens is, you know, even if you try to make the medical appointment for first thing in the morning, things get delayed. Then it's always nice to take your child to breakfast or lunch before you take them back to school, but they're missing that instructional time because they had this medical appointment. Or if it's in the middle of the day, they just don't go to school at all because it's easier than having to run back and forth to pick them up. So what happened as a result is the medical community agreed to schedule school-age students for appointments that were after the school day. And they even started to open up their practices one night a week and Saturdays so that families could get to those medical appointments when it was convenient for them and they didn't have to pull their kids out of school. So that was a really important voice. The medical field didn't, the community didn't realize that. And the school didn't realize the attendance was so impacted by when these appointments were happening. And they were able to change their whole system, which I thought was pretty powerful. So looking at how we are going to involve our medical community. It is 9:15, so I'm just going to show you there are additional, as you know, resources available for how to reflect and monitor that progress also. Okay. I want to thank you for your attention and your engagement this morning. Thank you. Again, look for a session tomorrow if you want more about the Accelerated Learning Toolkit, scaffolded supports, and aligning with school improvement. Thank you.